Creation of the universe. Science shows a number of ways that the universe could have come into existence, but none of them seem to require a god or creator. But wait, how did all the conditions for just such an event come about? Perhaps there is room for God in the equation after all. This video unites the very latest scientific facts, which we will accept as far as they go, with the very common belief that there is some sort of God and that there is some sort of reason that we exist. We will get into the science of creation in just a moment, but first we need to understand a few basic concepts about God and what his purposes could be, and see how that applies to the interesting universe that science is beginning to uncover. Science has pointed out how virtual particles can seemingly come out of nothing, and that leaves us to wonder, can science explain it all? So if science seems able to explain much of the world and its existence, we need to ask, is it necessary to even refer to God? Can science explain everything? The answer is no. There is so much beyond what physical science can answer. Important stuff like the reason for the universe, and why it seems so perfectly arranged for life in general and human life in particular. And of course the biggie, why are we here? And what is our purpose? As well as the related questions of what is right and what is wrong. Science by itself has no answer to these sort of questions. But it is interesting that once you know the reason for existence, it becomes easier to see where science applies to a modern religion. Let's take a rational look at the purpose of the universe. Is there a reason for the universe? Is there a purpose? Rather than assume at first there is no purpose, let's instead take a look at what the purpose might be, based on what is actually happening. Let us suppose that the universe is doing what it should, that its purpose is what it does. So what could be the scientific explanation for the universe? Consider this. If you asked a biologist what is the purpose of life, he would look at how life seems to expand to fill every available niche. He would look how midges grow as larvae underwater for 7 weeks, and then transform into pupae, and then emerge in a winged form to mate for about 3 days, and then lay eggs in the water, and then die. He would look at salmon that are born in freshwater streams and swim out to sea and live and grow for a number of years, and then return to the stream that they were born in, and then mate and spawn. Then after spawning, they die within a few days, fertilizing that stream and creating a nutrient-rich environment for the new infant salmon that are about to hatch. Everywhere he looks, he would see that life forms are growing to sexual maturity for a long time. Then they mate and spread their seed, and then they die. And he would have to answer that the purpose of life, based on what actually happens, the purpose of life is more life. Life begets life. And often, every action seems to lead up to reproduction, and then, bam, it's lights out. The organism gets old and dies off real fast, like it had fulfilled its purpose. The purpose of life seems to be more life. Now, if you ask the astronomer what the purpose of the universe is, well, most of them will look at you like you were a crazy person. Purpose of the universe, indeed. But if you press them to come up with a purpose, many would have to admit that the absurd features of the natural world appear to be all fine-tuned for the biological complexity of advanced life. In other words, everything from the mass ratios of atomic particles, the number of space dimensions, to the cosmological parameters that rule the expansion of the universe and the formation of galaxies, as well as the proper age of the universe that allows time for the elements to be developed in giant stars and blown out into nebula, which allows other stars and planets to be developed from the proper mix of elements that actually allow life. These other elements, particularly carbon and oxygen and nitrogen, were not in the original creation, the Big Bang. And now, after a few billion years, it now turns out to be that they have developed in exactly the right proportion needed to create the molecules of life. If any of the physical parameters, such as the mass of quarks or the timing of the early rapid expansion, were off even a fraction from the values that they are, it would be a different universe, unable to form life at all. All these facts, which are recently discovered, tends to lead many astronomers to admit that the apparent purpose of the universe seems to be as a cradle for advanced life forms. This makes you ask, where does all this apparent fine-tuning come from? Is it the manifestation of a plan for the universe? Is it an arrangement by a superior will to prepare the way for complex creatures? Science can't tell us. It can only point the way to the possibility that there is a reason for the existence of the universe. But we can learn that reason by listening to truth as it is revealed by latter-day prophets. And we can follow a tried and proven path of determining the truth of those revelations, which is fully explained in the section on truth in my book listed in the end of this video. A true religion will contain all truth, including the truths of modern scientific discoveries. Whatever God is, you can certainly say God is truth. A true teaching of God's Word, His Gospel, will include all truth. The problem has been that in the past, too many religions were built on incomplete understandings of all the truth. This is a major stumbling block for scientists trying to reconcile the facts that science is showing him with the regular teachings of most religions. We need a more modern religion that can tie the two together. There is not a different truth for spiritual matters and physical matters, but they should all be part of one whole. They appear different because physical rules and the methods of science can't yet measure the spiritual. It is the general view that science is anti-God. This is because science is based on physical measurements, which have nothing to say about the spiritual. Because science can't measure or even detect spiritual things, many scientists and non-scientists alike say that proves that the spiritual does not exist. But that isn't true. Science is a method of investigation. Many scientists believe that science has shown that God does not exist. But this is a belief, just like the opposite belief by very religious people. The belief in the non-existence of God is an unscientific belief and is not a provable theory, and as such it is not verifiable by scientific methods. A scientist cannot prove the non-existence of God any more than a scientist can do a scientific experiment that proves the existence of God. Spiritual beliefs are not open to scientific inquiry. And so, too, it can be said the same applies to anti-spiritual beliefs. Science, the use of the scientific method of investigation, can't study the non-physical. That doesn't mean that the non-physical doesn't exist in some form. The scientists that insist science hasn't anything to say about spiritual things are operating from a basis of faith, just like the most fundamental believer. They believe that it is so, with no scientific proof at all. Sure, they have the right to believe that if they want, but they shouldn't teach that it is a scientific fact. It is a belief system, the same as any other belief system. It is not a scientific fact. Science can't prove there isn't a spiritual basis for existence. Even science has to admit that there's a possibility of there being a non-physical basis for reality as we observe it. Recent discoveries by quantum physicists tend to reject the idea that human sense observations provide the real truth about objective reality. No, they seem to point to the fact that reality is quite different from what humans can sense, and needs to be described through mathematical descriptions that are becoming increasingly removed from physical observation. In physics, it is now common to speak of many space-times, or to define space-time as a 10 or 11-dimensional reality that dissolves into a sort of topological foam at the very small measurements below the Planck length. Modern physicists speak of realities that are beyond space-time, such as quantum fluctuations in a vacuum from which space-time as we see it seems to originate. And some physicists even view consciousness as an important element of reality, a required basis for the physical existence as we know it. It is untrue that modern physics rules out the possibility of non-physical entities, values, or events. In fact, there are important new theories and facts being discovered lately that tend to imply that there is much more going on in the universe than meets the eye. Now we'll look at some of these recent discoveries and theories as we attempt to bring all these facts and versions of spiritual beliefs into one unified whole right here before your very eyes. But first, we need to know a few definitions to get things clear. We will start with spirits and the possibility waves of entities, which could be called intelligences, and the big daddy of them all. Who or what is God? According to modern LDS teachings, all things physical were first created spiritually. They came to exist as a form of spirit bodies, and these spirits came from existing intelligences that always were. So what are the spirit bodies just mentioned? A modern-day prophet taught us there is no such thing as immaterial matter. All spirit is matter, but it is more fine or pure and can only be discerned by purer eyes. We cannot see it, and when our bodies are purified, we shall see that it is all matter. Now, exactly what that means is not clear, but the LDS teachers explain that the spirit of man is in the likeness of his person. The spirit looks a lot like the physical person, and that spirits are also capable of intellectual advancement and memory and certain feelings, but not the really earthy body feelings, but the more intellectual feelings like love and hate and sorrow and happiness and obedience and disobedience, as well as many other personal characteristics. Now, what is the likelihood that there is a spiritual existence as mentioned above? Well, consider Stephen Hawking's explanation of dark matter as possibly a shadow galaxy, offset from our physical galaxy just a minor amount, but on a different membrane, in a different dimension. We wouldn't be able to see the shadow galaxy as light doesn't go from one membrane to the other, but there are gravitational effects. The shadow galaxy would be detected as a form of dark matter. We'll go into this possible explanation later. But for now, scientifically, you will have to accept the possibility that there is a spiritual plane, or membrane, or as the cosmologists call it, brain, that could be somewhat similar to our physical plane, with planets and even perhaps creatures or people that can't physically interact with our plane of existence. It could be. We need to explore how this idea fits into the overall explanation of existence as it is, or it appears to be. A Latter-day Prophet also taught that there have always existed intelligences from the beginning with God, and that such matter was eternal and coexistent with God. But sometime after the initial creation of the universe, it was organized into spiritual bodies by our Heavenly Father. We will look at these intelligences a little bit later. So who or what is God? Well, we know from latter-day revelation who God is. It is the key point of understanding overall truth. If there is no God, or if you can't understand God, then you can't know what His purpose is, and you can't know the truth of why you exist. And if you don't know why you exist, or why you should do any one thing as opposed to another, then there is no reason to do anything. Just eat and drink and be merry, because that's all it is. There is nothing else. If there is no overall reason, then any reason is as good as the next one. It is important to know the truth. Otherwise, you'll be like a ship with no rudder and will be blown about by every different wind of doctrine. Even if there is an ultimate truth, if you can't discover it, you will likely lead your life based on falsehood. But you can find out what truth is by following the steps outlined in the section of my book on truth, where we investigate all known methods of discovering truth. But of course, that's in the book, not contained here in this video. But back to who is God? Many define God as the infinite personal being who has created the universe, saying that God has the power to intervene in human affairs, that He is an active, all-powerful force who is motivated by a limitless love and tempered by justice, and who has all knowledge and infinite wisdom. God is truth. God is an infinite, eternal, uncreated, omnipotent person. Now, there's nothing wrong with this definition. It could use a bit more concrete facts, but it will suffice to get our explanation on the creation of universes going. Opposed to the above definition is the more Eastern mystical belief that God is utterly and totally transcategorical. God is indescribable, beyond all being and knowledge. God, the ultimate one, is not soul or mind, nor does it possess imagination, conviction, speech, or understanding. It cannot be grasped by understanding. It does not live, nor is it life. It is not a substance, nor is it eternity or time. God is the first cause. Some others teach a sort of merging of the personal God, as seen in Christianity, with the indescribable God of the Eastern mystical concept, saying that the indescribable God becomes a personable or knowable God through his worshippers. The worshippers see him as a person due to their limited minds and due to their incomplete understanding. And since he is everything and nothing, he is also then a person, because that is how humankind see him. If there were no creations to be conscious of him, he would remain the undescribable God of everything and nothing at all.